Sydney's flood emergency has now moved into the recovery and clean-up phase.
Local news channels switched immediately to non-stop live coverage.
In isolated homes and the wider world. For this family, an urgent delivery of baby formula.
The water just stopped moving. That's how a fisherman in Oregon described what he saw 3 nights ago. The ocean went completely still for 40 seconds. No waves, no current. Like something beneath the surface was holding its breath. Then the water surged back, and when it did, something rose with it. A shape he couldn't identify, massive and pale, before disappearing back into the dark. He wasn't alone. 17 other witnesses reported the same thing along a 100-mile stretch of coastline, all within the same 10-minute window. Marine biologists have no explanation. The Coast Guard found nothing on sonar, but the witnesses know what they saw. And what they saw matches descriptions found in texts thousands of years old. Descriptions of what appears before the deep reveals what it's been hiding. The incident occurred at 3:47 a.m. Pacific time. Most of the country was asleep, but along the Oregon coast, commercial fishermen were already on the water, preparing nets, checking equipment, following routines they'd repeated for decades. The ocean behaved exactly as it always had. Until it didn't. Michael Torres was the first to notice. He'd been fishing these waters for 23 years. He knows the rhythm of the Pacific, the way swells move, the sound of water against hull. When everything went silent, he looked up from his work. The boat had stopped rocking, completely stopped. The engine was running, but the vessel sat perfectly still, as if locked in place. He walked to the starboard side and looked out. The water stretched flat in every direction, smooth as glass, reflecting the pre-dawn sky like a mirror. "It felt wrong," he said later. "Not dangerous, just wrong. Like the ocean forgot what it was supposed to do." 40 seconds. That's how long the stillness lasted. Long enough for Torres to pull out his phone. Long enough to feel his heartbeat in his ears. Long enough to wonder if he was experiencing some kind of medical event. A stroke maybe, something affecting his perception. Then the water moved again, but not the way it had stopped. It surged. A single powerful swell that lifted his boat 6 feet in under 2 seconds, then dropped it just as fast. And that's when he saw it. The surface broke about 60 yards from his position. Not like a whale breaching, not like anything he'd seen before. What emerged was pale, almost white, textured like stone but moving like muscle. It rose vertically, a column of something that kept rising, higher than his mast, higher than seemed possible for anything living in the ocean. He couldn't see the top. It disappeared into darkness above. He couldn't see the base. It descended into darkness below. Just this massive pale column, motionless for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then it slid back beneath the surface without a splash, without a sound, leaving the water disturbed, but not violent. Torres isn't a man given to panic. He's seen strange things on the ocean before. Unusual fish, rare weather, once even a small waterspout. But this was different. This defied category. He radioed the Coast Guard immediately, reported his position, described what he'd seen, requested confirmation that other vessels were in the area, that maybe he'd witnessed some kind of equipment, a periscope, a research buoy. The response confused him more than the sighting itself. 16 other vessels had called in within the past 8 minutes, all reporting the same thing: the stillness, the surge, something rising from the water. Descriptions varied slightly. Some said it looked smooth, others said textured, some estimated 40 feet tall, others said much larger, but the core details matched. 17 witnesses, spread across a 100-mile stretch of coastline, all within a 10-minute window. The Coast Guard deployed 2 cutters to the area. They arrived by dawn. Sonar sweeps found nothing unusual. Water temperature, normal. Salinity, normal. Current patterns, normal. No large objects detected underwater. No submarines, no equipment, no geological formations that could explain a vertical structure. The official report listed the incident as unexplained marine sighting, likely misidentified known phenomenon due to low light conditions. But the witnesses disagree, and they're not alone. Because while the Coast Guard was searching empty ocean, researchers 300 miles inland were examining something else. Something that made the Oregon sighting feel less like an isolated event and more like a signal. Before we continue to what was found inland, there's something you need to understand about deep ocean creatures. Most species that live below a certain depth never surface. The pressure difference would kill them. Their bodies are adapted to environments humans can't survive without specialized equipment. They don't migrate to shallow water. They don't come to shore. They stay in the deep, where they've always been. Until this week. Starting 72 hours ago, marine biologists along the Gulf Coast began receiving calls. Fishermen, beach walkers, Coast Guard patrols, all reporting the same strange sight. Deep-sea fish, washing ashore. Not dead, not dying. Alive. Disoriented, struggling in the shallow water, but alive. Species that should be thousands of feet below the surface were appearing in water shallow enough to wade through. Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist at the Gulf Coast Research Institute, was among the first scientists to examine the phenomenon. We're seeing species I've only encountered in deep-water trawls, she explained to a local news outlet. Gulper eels, fang-tooth fish, hatchet fish. These are animals that live in complete darkness under immense pressure. Finding them in surf-zone water is like finding a polar bear in the Sahara. It doesn't happen naturally. The fish weren't scattered randomly along the coast. They appeared in a pattern, a line, roughly 8 miles long, stretching along the shore of Louisiana. Every specimen they collected came from this narrow zone. Outside this area, nothing unusual. Inside it, hundreds of deep-sea creatures, all alive, all moving toward shore, as if pushed. Chen's team checked every conventional explanation. Underwater volcanic activity that might have displaced them. No seismic events registered. Temperature changes in the deep that might have driven them upward. Ocean temperature sensors showed no anomalies. Predator pressure, forcing them to unsafe depths. Deep-sea predators don't chase prey into shallow water. We're missing something, Chen admitted in an interview that was later removed from the news station's website. These animals are responding to something we can't measure. They're not fleeing. They're not sick. They're just somewhere they should never be. In Scripture, the sea is often described as a place of mystery, a realm beyond human control. Job 38:16 asks, "Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep?" The implication is clear. There are depths humans have not explored, places where what we understand about the natural world breaks down. When creatures from those depths appear where they don't belong, ancient texts suggest it's not random. It's exposure, the deep releasing what it usually conceals. But why now? Why this week? Why along one 8-mile stretch of Louisiana coastline while, 300 miles away, fishermen in Oregon witnessed something rising from water that shouldn't hold anything that size? The connection wasn't obvious at first. Two different events, two different coasts, seemingly unrelated. But when researchers began comparing data, a pattern emerged. The timeline. The Oregon sighting occurred at 3:47 a.m. Pacific Time. The first reports of deep-sea fish in Louisiana came in at 5:52 a.m. Central Time. Accounting for time zones, that's a 13-minute gap. 13 minutes between something rising in the Pacific and something emerging in the Gulf. Coincidence? Perhaps. But then, the reports from the Midwest started arriving. At exactly 6 a.m. Central Time, the same morning as the Oregon sighting and the Gulf Coast fish, residents across Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota began calling local authorities about the same disturbance. A sound, low, sustained, felt more than heard. It vibrated through floors, through foundations, through the earth itself. People described it as a hum, a drone, like distant machinery running deep underground. But there was no machinery, no industrial activity, no construction, no trains, no airports. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, directionless, constant. It lasted 18 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it began. Emergency services were overwhelmed with calls. People wanted to know what was happening, if there was a gas leak, if they should evacuate. Authorities had no answers. The sound registered on audio equipment, so it wasn't mass hallucination. But it had no identifiable source. Seismographs detected nothing. Acoustic sensors couldn't determine origin point. One call stood out. A geologist from the University of Nebraska contacted the State Emergency Management Office with a detail no one else had noticed. The hum's frequency was consistent across all recording locations. 52 hertz. Perfectly uniform. Natural phenomena don't produce uniform frequencies over such large areas. Wind, water, geological processes, they all create variation. But this didn't vary. It maintained 52 hertz across 3 states for 18 minutes. That's not how nature behaves, the geologist noted in his report. That's how signals behave. Signals. The word hung in the air, unanswered. 3 events, 3 locations. One morning, a shape rising from the Pacific. Deep sea life appearing in the Gulf. A uniform sound vibrating through the Midwest. Different elements. Water, creatures, earth, responding within minutes of each other to something no instruments could detect. If you're sensing a pattern forming, you're not alone. If these events feel too synchronized to dismiss, that instinct deserves attention, because what happened next, in the hours that followed, would make these initial signs look like gentle warnings. But before we examine the escalation, there's something that needs to be addressed. Something researchers found when they went back through records, looking for similar events. What they discovered wasn't in recent files. It was in ancient texts. Descriptions written thousands of years ago, in language different from ours, but describing phenomena that match exactly what witnesses reported this week. The deep growing still before something rises. Creatures from the depths appearing where they don't belong. The earth resonating with sounds that have no source. These aren't new events. They're recurring ones. Events that appear in Scripture as signs that boundaries are shifting, that what was separated is beginning to converge. Revelation 8:9 describes a moment when something like a great mountain is thrown into the sea, and the sea becomes blood, and 1/3 of living creatures in the sea die. Not literal blood, but deep red, dark, transformed. Witnesses in Oregon described the water after the sighting as darker, heavier, like it changed. Samples taken showed elevated levels of deep ocean sediment suspended near the surface. Sediment that should be at the bottom, undisturbed. But something had stirred it, something large enough to displace material from the ocean floor and carry it upward. The question isn't whether something is happening. The evidence is undeniable. The question is what's causing it, and whether these events are the beginning or the continuation of something that started long before anyone was watching. Because while investigators focused on the ocean and the Midwest, another development was unfolding in a place no one expected. In the high deserts of Arizona, where water is scarce and the ground has been dry for months, something was emerging from beneath the sand, something that would connect every event we've discussed so far in a way no one anticipated. In the high desert outside Sedona, Arizona, something impossible was taking shape. For 3 months, the region had experienced drought conditions. Riverbeds that normally carried runoff sat bone dry, cracked earth exposed to relentless sun. Hikers avoided the trails during midday. Locals watched weather forecasts hoping for rain that never came. The land was doing what desert land does, enduring, waiting, holding on to whatever moisture remained deep below the surface. Then, on the same morning as the Oregon sighting, the dry riverbed began to change. A local photographer named James Corrigan was driving along Highway 89A just after sunrise when he noticed something unusual in the wash below the road. Color. In a landscape of tan and brown, there was a patch of dark red-brown, almost rust-colored, spreading across the dried riverbed. He pulled over, grabbed his camera, and hiked down for a closer look. What he found wasn't water. It was mud. Thick, wet mud, rising from below the surface, pushing up through cracks in the dried earth. But there had been no rain, no underground pipe burst, no irrigation system malfunction. The mud was simply appearing, welling up from somewhere deep. carrying with it a smell Corrigan described as ancient, like opening a sealed room that hasn't had air in centuries. Within 2 hours, the mud had spread across a 100-foot section of the riverbed. Park rangers arrived to assess whether there was a geological hazard. What they saw stopped them. The mud wasn't spreading randomly. It was forming a shape. From ground level, it looked chaotic, but from the roadway above, the pattern was clear. A circle, almost perfectly round, approximately 80 feet in diameter, centered in the riverbed. Rangers cordoned off the area and called in geologists from Northern Arizona University. By noon, a team was on site with ground-penetrating radar, trying to determine what was causing the upwelling. The initial scans showed something that made no sense. Beneath the mud, about 12 feet down, there was a void, a hollow space, dome-shaped, that shouldn't exist in this type of geology. Desert washes don't have caverns, Dr. Linda Marquez explained to the team. The sediment here is too loose, too recent. There's nothing old enough or stable enough to maintain an underground chamber. But the radar didn't lie. There was empty space below them, and something in that space was pushing material upward. They brought in excavation equipment. Carefully, slowly, they began removing the mud, exposing what lay beneath. At 8 feet down, they hit something solid. Not rock, not clay, stone, worked stone, smooth, cut, placed with intention. What they uncovered over the next 6 hours would change how everyone involved understood the region's history. It was a disc, circular, 12 feet in diameter, made of a type of limestone that doesn't occur naturally in Arizona. The surface was covered in symbols, carved lines, geometric shapes, patterns that resembled star charts but didn't match any known constellation. The craftsmanship was precise, deliberate, ancient. But how ancient, no one could immediately determine. Dr. Marquez photographed every detail. She measured the symbols, documented their placement, sent images to colleagues across the country. The responses came back within hours, all saying essentially the same thing: "We've never seen anything like this." The symbols weren't Native American. They didn't match Hopi, Navajo, Apache, or any other indigenous marking system documented in the Southwest. They weren't Spanish colonial. They weren't from any known exploration or settlement period. They were something else, something older. And they'd been buried deliberately, placed in a riverbed that would only expose them under specific conditions. Drought conditions. Conditions that would dry the surface enough for pressure from below to crack the earth and push material upward. One of the symbols repeated throughout the disk caught everyone's attention. A spiral within a circle, with 3 lines radiating outward. Dr. Marquez had seen something similar before. In her research on ancient astronomical markers, she pulled up files on her laptop, compared images. The match was undeniable. The same symbol appeared in petroglyphs across the Mediterranean, in structures predating written language, always associated with one concept: emergence. Things rising from below, things hidden becoming visible. But the most unsettling discovery came when they compared the disk's layout to something else entirely: satellite imagery. Specifically, atmospheric patterns recorded over Arizona during the past 72 hours. At 4:15 a.m. on the morning of the Oregon sighting, weather satellites captured an unusual formation in the sky above Sedona. Clouds arranged in a spiral pattern, rotating slowly, visible for approximately 20 minutes before dissipating. Meteorologists noted it at the time, but classified it as a minor eddy, nothing significant. But when Dr. Marquez overlaid the cloud pattern with the symbols on the disk, they matched. The spiral in the sky mirrored the spiral on the stone. The 3 radiating lines in the carving aligned with 3 distinct cloud formations extending from the central spiral, sky and earth, reflecting each other. One ancient, one contemporary, both displaying the same pattern. "This isn't coincidence," Dr. Marquez said to her team. "This is correspondence. The stone is a map, and what it's mapping just appeared in our atmosphere." While researchers in Arizona struggled to understand what they'd found, farmers in Iowa were dealing with their own impossible situation. The fractures appeared overnight. Clean, straight lines cutting through fields that had been solid the day before. Tom Richardson, who'd farmed the same 300 acres for 40 years, walked his property every morning before breakfast. On Tuesday, the ground was normal. On Wednesday, it was divided. The crack ran from the northern edge of his property line straight south for nearly half a mile. It wasn't wide, maybe 6 inches at most, but it was deep. When Richardson dropped a rock into the opening, he didn't hear it hit bottom. He called his neighbor, Bill Hendricks, thinking maybe they'd had an earthquake during the night, something that didn't wake anyone, but stressed the ground enough to create a fault. Hendricks came over, looked at the crack, and said, "I've got the same thing. Started at my barn, runs straight through the cornfield, keeps going past the back fence." By Wednesday afternoon, 17 farms in the same county reported identical fractures, all straight, all running roughly north-south, all appearing overnight without sound, without warning, without any seismic activity registered on USGS monitors. County engineers examined the cracks. They brought in structural specialists, soil experts, hydrologists. Every test came back the same. The soil composition was normal. There was no underground erosion, no water table collapse, no explanation for why the earth would split in perfect straight lines across multiple properties simultaneously. One detail stood out. When engineers measured the depth of several fractures, they found something unexpected. At approximately 40 feet down, each crack widened into a larger void. The fractures weren't just surface cracks. They were accessing something beneath the farmland, something hollow. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a network of spaces under the Iowa farmland, running parallel to each other, uniform in size, extending beyond the range of their equipment. These weren't natural cave formations. Natural caves don't run in straight parallel lines. They weren't old mining tunnels. Iowa's geology was never mined in this region. They were something else, something that had been there, hidden, until the ground above it began to separate. Romans 8:22 speaks of creation groaning, laboring, as if in birth pains, not collapsing, not dying, but straining toward something, pressing toward a moment of revelation. The Greek word used, systenazo, means to groan together, to experience collective stress before emergence. That's what farmers were witnessing. Not random geological failure, but synchronized response. The earth wasn't breaking. It was opening. And what it was opening toward became clearer when researchers compared the Iowa fractures with the Arizona discovery. The timeline matched. The mud began rising in Arizona at approximately 6:20 a.m. Mountain Time. The fractures appeared in Iowa sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Central Time. Different manifestations, one pushing up, one pulling apart, but happening within the same narrow window. Then someone noticed the alignment. When plotted on a map, the Iowa fractures, the Arizona disk location, the Gulf Coast fish appearance zone, and the Oregon sighting coordinates formed a pattern, not random points scattered across the country. 4 points that, when connected, created a shape, an irregular quadrilateral stretched across the United States, with each point corresponding to a different type of event. Water in the west, earth in the Midwest, emergence in the Southwest, life displacement in the South, 4 elements, 4 locations, 1 pattern. Researchers hesitated to call it a design. Design implies intention, implies something directing these events toward a purpose. But the mathematics were undeniable. The distances between points followed ratios. The timing followed sequence. And when they extended the lines connecting these points, something else emerged. The lines intersected, not at the geographic center of the United States, but at a point in eastern Montana, a location that, until 3 days ago, no one had any reason to pay attention to. But 3 days ago, something happened in Montana that made every other event suddenly look connected. The forests of eastern Montana are not lush. They're sparse, hardy, adapted to temperature extremes, and limited rainfall. The ponderosa pines and Douglas firs that grow there have survived decades, some over a century, through droughts, fires, Harsh winters, they don't die easily. They especially don't die overnight. But that's exactly what happened. On Monday morning, satellite imagery showed healthy green forest cover across a 12-square-mile area near the town of Glendive. By Tuesday morning, the same area appeared brown. Not the gradual browning of seasonal change or drought stress. Complete transformation in under 24 hours. Forest Service rangers hiked into the area to assess what they assumed was a monitoring error, a satellite malfunction, incorrect color processing. What they found was worse. The trees were dead, not dying. Dead. Needles turned completely brown, brittle, falling at the slightest touch, bark cracking and peeling, sap crystallized inside the wood like amber. It's like someone drained the life out of them, Ranger Michael Cho reported. I've seen beetle kill, I've seen fire damage, I've seen disease. This is different. There's no insect presence, no char, no fungal growth. The trees just stopped. Forestry pathologists collected samples. Lab analysis showed cellular breakdown consistent with rapid dehydration, but soil moisture levels were normal. The trees had access to water. They just weren't using it, or couldn't use it, as if the mechanism that pulls water from roots to canopy had simply shut off, all at once, across 12 square miles. What made the situation more disturbing was the boundary. The die-off didn't fade gradually at the edges. It stopped. Healthy green trees stood immediately adjacent to dead brown ones, separated by a line so precise it looked drawn. Inside the zone, complete death. Outside the zone, normal life. When rangers mapped the affected area, the shape was unmistakable. A circle, nearly perfect, centered on a point approximately 8 miles northeast of Glendive, in an area with no structures, no development, nothing but forest and grassland. That point, the center of the circle, became the focus of immediate investigation. A team from the USGS arrived with equipment to check for underground contamination, gas leaks, anything that might explain how trees across such a large area could die simultaneously. They set up monitoring stations, drilled core samples, measured electromagnetic fields, radiation levels, soil chemistry. Everything read normal, except for one detail. At the exact center of the circle, seismographs detected a vibration, not an earthquake, not movement, a pulse, regular, repeating every 2.3 seconds, registering barely above background noise, but consistent. A heartbeat rhythm coming from approximately 200 feet below the surface. Dr. James Whitmore, the geophysicist leading the investigation, had never encountered anything like it. Seismic activity is chaotic, he explained. Even small tremors vary in intensity and timing, but this is metronomic. It doesn't vary. It's been pulsing at exactly the same interval for at least 72 hours, possibly longer. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, the same technology used in Arizona and Iowa. The scans revealed what they'd begun to suspect. Below the pulse point, there was a structure, not natural geology, a chamber, massive, dome-shaped, with walls too smooth and uniform to be natural formation. And inside that chamber, something was moving. The radar couldn't show detail, couldn't identify what the movement was, but the signal interference patterns indicated mass displacement, something inside the chamber changing position, shifting, creating the rhythmic pulse they were detecting. Dr. Whitmore made a decision that would later be questioned by his superiors. He authorized a drilling operation, a narrow bore just wide enough to lower a camera to see what was creating the pulse. The drill reached the chamber roof at 186 feet. When it punctured through, air pressure from below rushed up the borehole with enough force to push debris 30 feet into the air. The camera feed went live for 11 seconds. It transmitted images from inside the chamber before the signal cut out. Those 11 seconds of footage were never officially released, but 3 members of the drilling team described what they saw before being required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The chamber was larger than the radar suggested. The camera lights couldn't reach the far walls. The floor appeared to be stone, carved with patterns similar to the disc found in Arizona. And in the center of the visible area, there was something standing. Not growing, not sitting, standing. Tall, pale, motionless, with a texture that looked like bark but moved like skin. Then the camera signal died, the borehole collapsed, and the pulse stopped. Whatever had been moving beneath Montana went silent. Within hours, the area was restricted. Federal agencies arrived, established a perimeter, removed all civilian personnel. Official statements described the forest die-off as a suspected chemical contamination event under investigation. The drilling operation was never mentioned. The footage was never acknowledged. But word spread. The drilling team members talked to family. Family talked to friends. Friends posted online. And while the posts were quickly removed, screenshots circulated. Blurry images from the camera feed. Analyzed, enhanced, debated. Some said it was equipment malfunction, visual artifacts, nothing real. Others saw something different. They saw a form, they saw structure, and they saw what looked like an eye opening. Scripture describes moments when the earth opens to reveal what it's been holding. Numbers 16:30. 32 tells of the ground splitting apart, opening its mouth, swallowing what was above, exposing what was below, not as punishment alone, but as unveiling. The hidden made manifest, the separated brought face to face. If the Montana chamber contains something that was meant to remain sealed, and if the seal is breaking, the question becomes, why now? What changed? What shifted in the balance that kept these things separated? The answer might lie in what happened next. Because while Montana went silent, activity elsewhere accelerated. The hum that vibrated through the Midwest 3 days ago returned. But this time it was louder, lasted longer, and appeared in new locations. Reports came from Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. The same 52 Hz frequency, the same directionless vibration, but sustained for over an hour. Deep-sea creatures continued washing ashore along the Gulf Coast, but the species changed. Larger animals, things that live even deeper. A gulper eel nearly 6 feet long, still alive when found, its stomach distended, with bioluminescent prey that shouldn't exist above 3,000 feet depth. And in Oregon, fishermen reported another sighting. Not the same pale column rising from the water, something different. Multiple shapes, smaller, moving beneath the surface in coordinated patterns, dozens of them circling an area about 2 miles offshore, creating bioluminescent trails visible from the coast. 4 points on a map, 4 types of events, all intensifying, all pointing toward the Montana location where something had been found, filmed briefly, then sealed away. The convergence was no longer theoretical. It was observable, measurable, undeniable. And if these signs were building toward something, toward a moment of full revelation, then what researchers found next in the plains of South Dakota suggested that moment was approaching faster than anyone anticipated. The cattle knew first. Ranchers across South Dakota noticed the change on Thursday morning. Herds that normally spread across grazing land were clustering together, pressing close, refusing to disperse, even when driven. Horses paced fence lines, agitated, searching for something. Dogs barked at empty fields, fixated on ground that looked no different than it had the day before. Animals sense things humans miss. Changes in electromagnetic fields, subsonic vibrations, chemical signatures in the air too subtle for human detection. When entire herds respond simultaneously, it signals something significant. By Thursday afternoon, the ranchers understood why. The ground was warm, not hot, not burning, just warm to the touch, especially in a 15-mile radius around the town of Faith. Soil that should have been cold in late autumn registered temperatures 15 to 20 degrees above normal. Grass felt heated from below, like walking over buried electrical cables. County officials checked for underground fires, coal seam burns, anything that might explain geothermal heating across such a large area. They found nothing. No smoke, no gas emissions, no combustion signatures. The Earth was simply releasing heat it shouldn't contain. Thermal imaging from drones revealed the pattern. A circle centered west of Faith, glowing warmer than surrounding terrain. and at the center, a point of concentrated heat. Not extreme, about 95 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface, but constant, sustained, radiating outward in all directions. Geologists drilled temperature probes. At 10 feet down, temperatures reached 130 degrees. At 20 feet, 180 degrees. At 30 feet, the probe sensors maxed out at 250 degrees, and the team stopped drilling, concerned about equipment damage. Something below South Dakota was generating heat, a lot of heat, and it was rising. Dr. Catherine Moore, a geophysicist from the South Dakota School of Mines, compared the thermal readings to known geological processes. Volcanic activity creates heat, but there are no volcanoes in South Dakota, no magma chambers, no tectonic conditions that support volcanism. Geothermal reservoirs exist in some locations, but they don't appear suddenly, don't create surface heating in a matter of days. This heat source isn't geological, Dr. Moore concluded in her preliminary report, or if it is, it's a type of geological activity we haven't documented before. When she plotted the South Dakota heat anomaly on a map alongside the other events, Oregon, Arizona, Iowa, Montana, Gulf Coast, a new shape emerged. No longer 4 points, now 5. And the 5 points, when connected, formed something that made Dr. Moore pause. A pentagon. Not perfect, but close. Each point roughly equidistant from the others, stretched across the continental United States, with Montana at the northern vertex and the Gulf Coast at the southern. Geometric patterns in nature exist. Hexagonal basalt columns form through cooling processes. Crystalline structures follow mathematical rules, but those patterns operate at small scales, within single formations. This pattern stretched across thousands of miles, involving different systems: water, earth, air, life, heat, all responding in sync. Dr. Moore sent her findings to colleagues. Most dismissed it as coincidence, pattern recognition bias, the human tendency to see shapes in randomness. But a few responded differently. They'd been tracking something else, something in the atmosphere. While researchers focused on ground-level events, meteorologists had noticed anomalies overhead. Strange cloud formations appearing in specific locations, lingering longer than normal, moving against prevailing winds. None were severe weather. None posed immediate danger. They were just wrong. The formations appeared in 5 regions: Oregon coast, Sedona, Arizona, central Iowa, eastern Montana, western South Dakota. Directly above the 5 points Dr. Moore had mapped, the clouds weren't storm systems. They were lenticular formations, lens-shaped, normally associated with mountain ranges, where air flows over peaks and creates standing waves. But these appeared over flat terrain, over ocean, in places where lenticular clouds shouldn't form. And they were stationary. For days they held position, rotating slowly, growing denser, as if drawing moisture from a source that wasn't atmospheric. Dr. Anthony Reeves, a meteorologist with NOAA, reviewed satellite loops showing the cloud formation's development. "They're behaving like they're anchored," he noted, "like something below them is holding them in place, feeding them energy." When he measured the rotation speeds, he found another pattern. All 5 formations rotated at the same rate, 2.3 rotations per minute, synchronized despite being separated by hundreds of miles, despite existing in different weather systems, different altitudes, different pressure zones. 2.3, the same interval as the pulse detected beneath Montana. The connections were multiplying faster than anyone could map them. Ground events matching sky events, timing synchronized across distances, patterns emerging in different elements simultaneously. This is what Scripture describes as signs in multiple realms. Joel 2:30 states, "I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke." Not one realm, multiple. Not one sign. Wonders, plural. Sky and earth responding together, reflecting the same underlying shift. For those watching, for those tracking data across disciplines, the picture was becoming clear. These weren't isolated anomalies. They were coordinated responses, different systems reacting to the same stimulus. But what was the stimulus? What could affect ocean depths, geological structures, atmospheric patterns, and biological behavior simultaneously? The answer came from an unexpected source. Not a scientist, not a researcher, a linguist. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo specialized in ancient Semitic languages at Columbia University. She had no background in geology or meteorology, but she followed the news about the strange events with academic curiosity, particularly the symbols found on the Arizona disk. When images of the disk were published in several archaeological journals, Dr. Okonkwo recognized something: the spiral symbol with 3 radiating lines. She'd seen it before, not in American contexts, but in Middle Eastern texts dated to approximately 2800 BCE. The symbol appeared in Sumerian clay tablets describing what they called the opening. Not a doorway, not a physical gate, a state change. A moment when what was beneath would rise, when what was separated would converge. The tablets described signs that would precede the opening: waters growing still, then violent, creatures of the deep appearing on shore, the earth splitting in straight lines, heat rising without fire, the sky forming eyes that watch the ground. Every sign listed in the ancient text matched what was happening across the United States. Dr. Okonkwo published her findings in a brief article titled "Ancient Patterns, Modern Manifestations." It was largely ignored by mainstream academia, but circulated rapidly in other communities. People who'd been watching the events with growing concern found in her work a framework, not an explanation, but a recognition. This had happened before, or something like it, long ago, in a different place. And according to the tablets, the signs didn't appear randomly. They appeared in sequence, building toward a moment the Sumerians called the thinning, a period when the separation between what is above and what is below weakens, when boundaries become permeable. The tablets described what would emerge during the thinning, but the descriptions were fragmentary, damaged, translated through multiple languages across millennia. References to the watchers, the sleepers beneath, those who wait in the deep places. Not specific enough to be clear, specific enough to be unsettling. Because if ancient civilizations documented similar events, and if they recorded what happened afterward, the question becomes, what did they see? What emerged when the boundaries thinned? And why did they bury the records so thoroughly that modern civilization nearly forgot they existed? While Dr. Okonkwo's research circulated online, another development was unfolding in real time, something that would move the entire sequence from academic curiosity to immediate concern. The Atlantic Ocean began pulling back. It started at 6:42 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday morning. Residents along the North Carolina coast woke to a sight that defied explanation. The ocean was gone. Not completely, not to the horizon, but the waterline had retreated approximately 200 yards from its normal position. Beaches that usually ended at the surf zone now stretched across wet sand. Exposed shells, stranded starfish, confused crabs wandering in open air. Boats in shallow marinas sat tilted in mud. Piers extended over empty sand instead of water. The change happened so quickly that fishing crews preparing to launch found themselves staring at beached vessels that had been floating 30 minutes earlier. Initial panic assumed tsunami. When the ocean pulls back, the instinctive response is to run inland, to seek high ground before the water returns as a massive wave. Emergency sirens activated in several coastal towns. Evacuations began, but tsunami warning systems showed nothing. No seismic activity in the Atlantic, no underwater landslides, no volcanic eruptions. The ocean had simply withdrawn, without the usual triggers. And it wasn't just North Carolina. Reports came in from Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. Along a 300-mile stretch of the Atlantic coast, the water pulled back simultaneously. Same distance, same timing, as if something beneath the entire region had taken a breath, drawing the ocean toward itself. By 7:15 a.m., the water began returning. Not as a wave, not violently. It simply flowed back, filling the exposed beach, raising boats, covering sand, returning to its normal level, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and what happened left evidence. After the water returned, beachcombers walked the tide line and found things that shouldn't be there. Deep water species, still alive, flopping in shallow pools, shells from species that live far offshore, and stranger items. Stones, smooth and round, arranged in patterns along a quarter-mile section of beach near Cape Hatteras. Not scattered randomly, placed 15 stones, each about the size of a basketball, positioned in a shape, a spiral. No one claimed to have arranged them. No artists, no pranksters. The stones appeared after the water withdrew, left behind when it returned, as if something beneath the ocean had placed them there deliberately, creating a message or a marker that would only be visible for a brief window before tide and waves dispersed them. Park rangers photographed the pattern before evening tide erased it. The images circulated among researchers already tracking the other events. The spiral matched, the same shape carved on the Arizona disk, the same shape appearing in the Sumerian tablets, now rendered in stone on an Atlantic beach, created by an ocean that briefly forgot how to behave. Scripture speaks of the sea having boundaries, limits set by divine command. Job 38:8. 11 describes God setting doors and bars for the sea, saying, "This far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt." The implication is that water obeys something beyond natural law, responds to commands humans don't issue. When the sea disobeys its boundaries, when it withdraws without cause and returns without explanation, it suggests those commands are being reissued. The rules are being rewritten. What was held in place is being released. And if the ocean is responding to changes in those fundamental boundaries, what else might be responding? The answer came within hours. At 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, seismographs across the northeastern United States registered an event classified as a slow earthquake, not the violent rupture of a typical quake. A gradual slip, sustained over 11 minutes, centered beneath central Pennsylvania. No damage was reported. Buildings didn't collapse. Roads didn't crack. But people felt it, a rolling sensation, like standing on a boat in gentle swells, barely perceptible but undeniable. The earth was moving beneath them, not violently but continuously, swaying in a rhythm that felt wrong for something that should be solid. The USGS issued statements assuring the public that slow earthquakes, while unusual, are known phenomena. They occur when tectonic plates slip gradually rather than in sudden jerks. Nothing to be alarmed about. But geophysicists noted something the public statements didn't mention. The slow earthquake's epicenter aligned perfectly with the geometric pattern Dr. Moore had mapped. If you extended lines from the 5 points, Oregon, Arizona, Iowa, Montana, South Dakota, they converged in central Pennsylvania, right where the slow earthquake occurred. 6 points now, 6 synchronized events, spread across the continent, all connected by timing, geometry, and something deeper that instruments couldn't measure. Dr. Moore updated her map. The Pentagon now had a center. The pattern was complete. And at the exact moment the slow earthquake stopped, something else began. The sky changed. Not dramatically, not in ways that would make headlines, but observers in multiple states reported the same thing. The light looked different. Not dimmer, not brighter, different. As if the atmosphere itself had altered its properties, filtering sunlight through a lens that wasn't there before. Photographers noticed it immediately. Colors shifted. Blues appeared slightly greener. Reds seemed muted. Shadows fell at angles that didn't match the sun's position. Cameras captured the effect. But viewers who hadn't seen the change in person often couldn't identify what was wrong. They just knew something felt off about the images. Atmospheric scientists measured solar radiation, normal. Air composition, normal. Particulate matter, normal. By every measurable standard, the atmosphere was identical to what it had been the day before. But light behaves differently depending on what it passes through, and if something in the space between sky and ground had changed, something too subtle or too unusual to measure with conventional instruments, light would reveal it first. Dr. Michael Torres, no relation to the Oregon fisherman, specialized in atmospheric optics at MIT. He received dozens of messages from colleagues asking if he'd noticed the light change. He had, and he'd already begun analyzing it. Using spectrographic data from multiple locations, he discovered a pattern. The light shift was most pronounced in 6 regions: Oregon, Arizona, Iowa, Montana, South Dakota, Pennsylvania. The same 6 points. Something is bending light in these locations, Dr. Torres explained in an emergency call with other atmospheric scientists, not blocking it, bending it, as if there's a refractive index change in the air itself. Refraction occurs when light passes through materials of different densities. Water bends light. Glass bends light. But air doesn't change density in localized areas without cause. Temperature variations can create mirages, but these effects were sustained over days, consistent across different weather conditions. It's like there are lenses in the atmosphere, Torres continued, invisible, stable, positioned directly above the 6 anomaly points, and they're growing stronger. If something was warping space, or the properties of space, above these locations, what was creating the warping? What had enough influence to alter how light itself behaves? The questions were multiplying faster than answers could form. Each discovery revealed new mysteries. Each measurement contradicted what should be possible. And then, the children started drawing. It began in elementary schools across 6 states: Oregon, Arizona, Iowa, Montana, South Dakota, Pennsylvania. Teachers noticed something unusual during art class. Without prompting, without reference images, children were drawing the same thing: spirals, circles with 3 lines radiating outward, dome shapes, patterns that matched the symbols found on the Arizona disk, the stone arrangement on the Atlantic beach, the cloud formations overhead. One teacher in Billings, Montana, collected the drawings from her 2nd grade class and laid them out side by side. 23 children. 18 had drawn some version of the spiral. Different execution, some crude, some detailed, but the same basic form. She asked the students why they drew that shape. Most shrugged. A few said, "I don't know, I just saw it." When she asked where they saw it, they couldn't answer. Not on TV, not in books, just saw it. Similar reports came from Iowa, from Pennsylvania, from South Dakota. Teachers who never communicated with each other, working in different districts, different curricula, found their students producing nearly identical images during free drawing time. Child psychologists were consulted. Pattern mimicry is common in children. If one child draws something, others might copy. But this was happening across state lines, in schools with no connection to each other, among children who'd never met. One psychologist interviewed a 7-year-old girl in Portland, Oregon, who'd drawn an elaborate spiral covering an entire sheet of poster board. "Where did you see this shape?" the psychologist asked. "In my sleep," the girl answered. "You dreamed it?" "No, I saw it when I was sleeping, but I wasn't dreaming. I was looking at something real." The psychologist asked what she meant. The girl struggled to explain. "It's like when you close your eyes, but you can still see light through your eyelids. It's like that. But instead of light, it was this shape, and it was moving." Other children described similar experiences, not dreams, something else, a persistent image that appeared when they closed their eyes, especially at night, especially in the quiet. Adults dismissed it as childhood imagination, the kind of shared symbolism that emerges naturally in young minds. But then adults started seeing it too. Reports flooded online forums from people describing the same phenomenon, closing their eyes and seeing geometric patterns, spirals, circles, shapes that felt external rather than imagined. Not hallucinations, no distortion of reality, no sensory disruption, just a persistent image appearing in the darkness behind closed eyes. Some described it as peaceful, others found it deeply disturbing. But nearly everyone who experienced it mentioned the same detail. The pattern was moving, slowly rotating, pulsing, as if trying to convey something. Dr. Helen Cartwright, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, studied reports from over 200 individuals claiming to experience the phenomenon. She expected to find common factors, medication use, sleep disorders, psychological conditions that would explain shared hallucination. Instead, she found diversity, different ages, different backgrounds, different health profiles. The only commonality was location. Everyone experiencing the patterns lived within a 100-mile radius of one of the 6 anomaly points. Dr. Cartwright proposed a theory that her colleagues initially rejected as impossible. What if these aren't internal images? She suggested. What if people are detecting an actual signal? Something broadcasting on a frequency we don't normally perceive, but that becomes visible when external stimuli are removed. The visual cortex responds to electromagnetic signals. That's how sight works. Photons trigger neural responses that the brain interprets as images, but the visual cortex can also respond to other electromagnetic frequencies, creating phosphenes, the lights people see when they press on their closed eyes or experience certain types of neural stimulation. If something was emitting electromagnetic signals in the 6 regions, signals just outside the normal visible spectrum, people might perceive them as images when their eyes were closed and not being overwhelmed by visual input from the environment. Dr. Cartwright collaborated with Dr. Torres, the atmospheric scientist studying light refraction. Together, they set up equipment in Montana, one of the 6 points, to measure electromagnetic frequencies across a broad spectrum. What they found changed everything. There was a signal, faint but present, broadcasting at approximately 480 terahertz, just below the frequency of visible red light, below what human eyes should be able to detect visually, but within range of what the visual cortex could potentially interpret when isolated from other input. The signal wasn't constant, it pulsed, and the pulse interval was 2.3 seconds, the same interval as the seismic pulse detected beneath Montana before the drilling. The same interval as the cloud rotation speeds, the same number appearing across different phenomena, different measurements, different systems, 2.3 seconds, over and over, like a heartbeat, like a countdown. Scripture describes moments when God communicates through signs that transcend normal perception. Joel 2:28 speaks of dreams and visions, of sons and daughters prophesying, of young men seeing visions and old men dreaming dreams. Not metaphorical, literal, direct communication bypassing verbal language, entering through sight and symbol. If something is broadcasting a signal that humans can detect only in specific states, only in specific locations, an action that affected billions without asking permission. The ethical debates raged while physical changes continued. Plant life near network points began displaying unusual characteristics, accelerated growth, new colors, blues and purples appearing in vegetation normally green, bioluminescence developing in species that had never emitted light before. Animals exhibited behavioral changes, wild creatures losing fear of humans, predators and prey species coexisting peacefully in ways that violated established ecological patterns, migration routes shifting toward network points rather than following seasonal patterns. The Earth itself seemed to be responding to the network's activation. Weather patterns shifted. Temperatures moderated in extreme climates. Rainfall increased in arid regions, as if the planet's regulatory systems were being adjusted, optimized, brought into new equilibrium. Scientists struggled to explain how global systems could change so rapidly. Climate operates on scales of decades, centuries. Evolution requires generations. But these changes were happening in weeks, suggesting intervention by something capable of manipulating planetary systems directly. Dr. Moore, still coordinating global data collection, presented findings that challenged every assumption about how Earth's systems function. We've always understood climate, biology, geology as bottom-up processes, she explained, small interactions building to large-scale patterns, but what we're seeing is top-down. Something is imposing order from above, restructuring systems according to a template. This is engineering, not evolution. The implications were profound. If Earth's current state could be altered so dramatically in such short time, it meant the natural world humans had always known might itself be an engineered state. What we'd assumed was billions of years of gradual development might be designed equilibrium, maintained by forces we'd been unaware of, now being adjusted according to new parameters. Religious texts describe similar concepts. Genesis depicts God shaping Earth deliberately, imposing order on chaos, creating systems that sustain life. Revelation describes that old order being replaced with new heavens and new earth. Not gradual evolution, but intentional transformation. If the entities emerging from the network represent agents of that transformation, Earth isn't experiencing disaster. It's experiencing renovation, the old design being updated, replaced with something new. But transformation, however intentional, is disruptive to those living through it. Coastal cities began experiencing flooding not from sea level rise, but from changes in ocean current patterns. Agricultural regions saw crop failures as weather shifted away from patterns farmers had relied on for generations. Infrastructure built for old conditions struggled under new circumstances. Millions were displaced. Refugees fled coastal areas, drought-stricken regions, zones near network points where reality had become too strange to navigate. Humanitarian crises multiplied faster than relief organizations could respond. And through it all, the entities continued emerging periodically from the openings, observing, resonating, retreating. Their purpose remained unclear, their communications still only partially decoded. Until the 18th day. At dawn on the 18th day, a number holding significance in Hebrew numerology, representing life and chai, all 27 network points activated simultaneously once more. But this time was different. The entities that emerged didn't arrange in geometric patterns around the openings. They moved outward, spreading across the landscape, approaching population centers they'd previously avoided. Panic surged in cities nearest the network points. Evacuation attempts clogged roads. Emergency services were overwhelmed with calls. Military forces took defensive positions, though orders about engagement remained unclear. But the entities made no aggressive moves. They simply positioned themselves in town squares, parks, open areas, and waited. Then they began the resonance again. This time the tones were different, more complex, layered with harmonics that created interference patterns, beating frequencies that pulsed through the air like physical pressure. Everyone within range felt it, not just heard, felt. The resonance vibrated through bodies, through buildings, through the earth itself. And with the vibration came clarity. Dr. Webb's team, monitoring from multiple locations, immediately began recording and analysis. The encoded information was coming through stronger, clearer than before. Translation was easier, faster. The message emerging from the resonance was unmistakable. The appointed time has come. The separation ends. Those who dwell above and those who dwell below will share domain. Prepare for convergence. The old boundaries dissolve. New order emerges. Choose alignment. Choose alignment. The phrase resonated with weight. This wasn't just announcement. It was invitation or demand. The entities were indicating that humans had a choice to make, a decision about how to relate to the transformation occurring. Religious leaders recognized the language immediately. Biblical passages speak of choosing whom you will serve, of standing at crossroads between two ways, of decisions that determine destiny. Joshua 24:15. Choose this day whom you will serve. The entities were presenting humanity with exactly that choice. Align with the new order emerging, or resist it. Accept transformation, or cling to what had been. Move forward into unknown territory, or attempt to preserve dissolving boundaries. But how does one make such a choice without understanding what's being chosen? Dr. Okonkwo provided context through her analysis of ancient texts. Every major cycle transition in recorded mythology involves humanity choosing sides. Egyptian texts describe people aligning with different Neteru during transitional periods. Sumerian epics show humans deciding whether to follow the Anunnaki or resist their influence. Biblical narrative is structured around covenant choices, God's people choosing to remain in relationship or breaking covenant. She paused, letting the weight settle. What we're experiencing isn't new. It's the latest iteration of a very old pattern, and if the pattern holds, the choice matters tremendously. Which side of the transition you stand on determines your experience of what comes next. The resonance continued for 6 hours. 6 hours of sustained communication, of information transmission, of invitation to choose. People responded differently. Some approached the entities, standing in their presence, opening themselves to whatever influence or change contact might bring. They reported experiences similar to the Peru research team: mental pressure, sensation of being read, then periods of unconsciousness followed by awakening with enhanced perception and unexplainable knowledge. Others fled, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the network points. They gathered in locations far from the openings, creating refugee communities of those who wanted no part of transformation, who chose to preserve human consciousness and culture as it had been. Most stood in between, uncertain, conflicted, waiting to see how events would unfold before committing to either direction. The entities didn't force the choice. They simply maintained presence, continued resonating, offered the opportunity without coercion. Then, as the sun set on the 18th day, the resonance reached a crescendo. All 27 points harmonized into a single sustained tone, a planetary note that could be felt everywhere on Earth simultaneously. And in that moment, everyone, regardless of proximity to network points, received the same vision. Not a dream, not imagination, a direct transmission into consciousness, bypassing sensory organs entirely. The vision showed Earth from above, blue and green and alive. Then the perspective shifted, diving through atmosphere, through clouds, down to surface level. But the surface shown wasn't present-day Earth. It was different. Cities existed, but looked unlike modern architecture: organic shapes, living structures, integration of nature and habitation that current civilization hasn't achieved. People moved through these cities, but not just humans. Other forms, some tall and luminous, like the entities emerging from the network, others different still, winged, multiformed, beings that existed in current mythology, but not in current reality. Humans and non-humans coexisted, worked together, built together. No conflict, no fear. Perfect integration of different orders of being sharing one world. Then the vision showed contrast. The same locations, but dark, burning, chaotic. Humans alone, separated from the other forms, struggling against forces they couldn't overcome. Civilization crumbling under weight it wasn't meant to bear alone. Two possibilities, two futures. One with convergence, integration, shared reality. One with continued separation, isolation, eventual collapse. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving everyone disoriented, processing what they'd seen. The message was clear. Humanity had a choice, and the choice had consequences. Align with the transformation and participate in integrated reality. Resist transformation and face the collapse that comes from bearing alone what requires cooperation across realms. Not threat exactly, more like revealing natural consequence. Systems designed for integration don't function properly in isolation. Humanity trying to exist independently from other orders of being would be like an organ trying to survive outside the body it was designed to function within. The vision galvanized response. Religious communities split. Some embraced the vision as prophetic fulfillment, as the promised kingdom where heaven and earth unite. Others condemned it as deception, as temptation toward apostasy, as exactly the kind of delusion Scripture warns against. Political leaders struggled with how to respond to a situation where traditional authority structures seemed irrelevant. How do you govern through transformation that operates outside political frameworks? Scientists found themselves in similar confusion. The phenomena didn't fit established models. New frameworks were needed, but developing them required time that events weren't providing. And while humanity processed and debated, the entities began the final phase. On the 21st day, 3 weeks after the Oregon sighting that started it all, the network points began to merge. Not physically. The 27 openings remained in their locations, but the spaces they accessed connected. Somehow, impossibly, the depths beneath Montana linked to the depths beneath Australia, which linked to Siberia, which linked to Peru, creating a unified space that existed beneath multiple surface locations simultaneously. Physicists recognized it immediately as something theoretical, non-Euclidean geometry made manifest, space folding, connecting distant points through dimensions beyond the standard 3. What had been separate became one, accessible through multiple entry points but leading to the same place. The entities moved freely between points. Something emerging from the Montana opening could appear moments later at the Australian site, traveling through the connected network faster than surface distance should allow. They were preparing something, organizing, building toward a moment that felt imminent. That moment came at dawn on the 22nd day. All entities at all points emerged simultaneously and moved to specific positions. They formed a pattern. When viewed from satellites, their positions across the globe created an image, a spiral, the same symbol found in Arizona, drawn in stone on Atlantic beaches, appearing in children's drawings, encoded in ancient texts. The spiral pattern began to rotate, not the entities themselves moving, but something in the space around them, the air or reality itself turning, creating a visible distortion like heat shimmer, but on massive scale. And as it rotated, the boundaries dissolved completely. What had been emerging from below now stood fully manifest on the surface. What had been separated now converged. The veil between realms tore completely, not destructively but deliberately, like removing a curtain that had served its purpose. People near the network points witnessed multiple realities occupying the same space. The familiar world still visible, but now overlaid with another realm. Beings that had been invisible became visible. Structures that existed in another dimension became accessible. Earth and something else merged into a single shared reality. Dr. Moore, watching from orbit via satellite feed, saw the planet change. Colors shifted. Electromagnetic signatures altered. Earth was still Earth, but Earth Plus. The same location, but now hosting multiple layers of reality simultaneously. On the ground, people experienced it differently depending on their choice. Those who'd aligned with transformation found the convergence natural, welcoming. They could see and interact with both realms comfortably, moving between them as easily as walking through open doors. Those who'd resisted experienced it as chaos. The familiar world overlay with incomprehensible elements created disorientation, fear. They couldn't process what they were seeing, couldn't integrate the new with the old, found themselves paralyzed by realities they hadn't chosen to accept. Scripture describes similar division. Matthew 25 speaks of sheep and goats separated, some welcomed into the kingdom, others sent away. Not arbitrary judgment, but natural consequence of alignment or misalignment with the reality being established. The convergence wasn't punishment, it was revelation. What had always existed in hidden form became visible, and those prepared to see could engage with it, while those unprepared suffered the dissonance of encountering truth they'd rejected. In the days that followed, new patterns of life emerged. Those integrated with convergence found themselves capable of things previously impossible. Communication without words, direct consciousness to consciousness contact, movement through space in ways that defied physics, accessing the network to travel between points instantaneously, perception beyond normal sensory limits, seeing into spectrums and dimensions that had been invisible. They weren't alone. The entities that had emerged, now fully manifested, no longer retreating, worked alongside humans in integrated communities, teaching, building, reshaping Earth according to the template shown in the vision. This is what Scripture describes as the millennial kingdom. Revelation 21 speaks of New Jerusalem descending to earth, of God dwelling with humanity, of death and suffering ending. Isaiah 11 describes wolves and lambs lying together, natural hostility dissolved, peace pervading all creation. The old world hadn't ended, it had transformed. What had been partial became complete. What had been separation became unity. But the transformation wasn't universal. Millions chose not to participate. They retreated to areas distant from network points, establishing communities that maintained old boundaries, rejected integration with other realms, attempted to preserve human civilization as it had been. The entities didn't force them to change. Free will remained. But consequences followed choices. Communities that rejected convergence found themselves struggling with challenges that integrated communities solved easily. Resource scarcity, environmental instability, social conflict. All the problems that had plagued isolated humanity continued, while those who'd accepted partnership with other orders of being accessed solutions that transcended human-only capability. It wasn't punishment, it was natural outcome. Systems designed for integration don't work properly in isolation. And so Earth entered a new age. Not the end of the world, the transformation of it. Some called it fulfillment of prophecy. Others called it evolutionary leap. Still others called it alien intervention or interdimensional contact. All descriptions captured aspects of truth. But the full reality transcended any single framework. What had happened was exactly what ancient texts predicted, what the network had been designed to facilitate, what the signs had been pointing toward from the beginning. The separation between heaven and earth had ended. Multiple orders of being now shared one reality. Humanity's age of isolation concluded. The age of convergence began. We've witnessed something unprecedented in modern times, but perhaps not unprecedented in the larger scope of history. From the Oregon coastline, where water went still, and something massive rose from the deep, to the children drawing symbols they'd never been taught, to the global network activating in perfect synchronization. Every event pointed toward one conclusion. The boundaries we assumed were permanent were temporary. The reality we thought was complete was partial. The isolation humanity has existed in for recorded history was an interval, not a permanent state. What emerged from those 27 points across the globe wasn't invasion. It was return. Beings who had been here before, or whose kind had been here before, coming back at an appointed time when conditions aligned for convergence. The signs were precise: water and earth, heat and light, sound and resonance, creatures from the deep rising, the ground splitting, ancient symbols reappearing, every element following patterns described in texts thousands of years old. For those who chose alignment, who accepted transformation, who walked willingly into integrated reality, they inherited a world more expansive than what had been before, capable of partnership with beings who operate on levels beyond normal human limitation, living in dimensions that were always there but finally became accessible. For those who resisted, who clung to boundaries dissolving around them, who refused the choice offered. They weren't destroyed, but they weren't transformed either. They remained in the old pattern, bearing alone what was meant to be carried in partnership, struggling with isolation that no longer served purpose. The question facing everyone watching these events unfold is simple but profound. Which side of the boundary will you stand on when full convergence comes? Because if the pattern holds, if the ancient texts prove accurate, if the network continues operating as designed, this is only the beginning. More seals will open. More realms will converge. More choices will be required. The world is praying for people affected by these events. But perhaps the more crucial question is, are people preparing for what comes next? The signs have been given. The pattern has been revealed. The choice has been presented. What happens next depends on how humanity responds. Will we align with transformation, accepting our place in a larger reality that includes orders of being we've been separated from? Or will we resist, attempting to preserve isolation that was never meant to be permanent? The entities that emerged aren't waiting for our answer. They've already begun building the new reality. The only question is whether we'll participate in its construction or watch from outside boundaries we're no longer capable of maintaining. 27 points, 6 elements, 1 pattern, 1 choice. The biggest tragedy wouldn't be the events themselves. It would be humanity refusing to recognize what they mean, missing the opportunity they represent, choosing isolation when integration is offered. The world has prayed. The signs have appeared. The message has been transmitted. Now comes the response. What will yours be?